Greetings! You've reached the Signal Watch Halloween series. Join me and my creepy cadre of co-contributors as we examine artifacts from the catacombs, boldly explore creeping horrors, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this spooky. Welcome back to another very spooky episode of The Signal Watch. As always, I'm your spooktacular host, Ryan Steens.
Is that a new intro?
That's the new intro. We're going to do this no matter what we're doing.
Ooh! This is Simon Day as well. It's a very camp ghost, actually.
And we are here today to talk about two movies, and we're much as we have done with the werewolf podcast, we're going to talk about two
vampires.
Right.
Vampires. And we chose. So we had a kind of a short list, but we ended up choosing Vamp from 1986 and Fright Night, the original Fright Night from 1985.
Yeah, as it turns out, neither of which I had seen. I thought I had seen Fright Night at some point, and now I need to track down what that movie was I thought was Fright Night. So if you know of a movie with, like, middle school boys...
Watching girls getting undressed from a
Well,
window?
no. It was middle school boys who were fighting a vampire, but I don't know what it was. So if anybody has any
So it was
idea,
a horror film? It was a horror film?
Yeah, kind of. It was not Monster Squad. Don't send me Monster Squad. I know Monster Squad.
See, I should know that. Really, shouldn't I? But
I don't know. And then, so I'd watched 20 minutes or so, I figured out, of Fright Night, not knowing what it was, and thought it was like kind of a horny teen movie, and just wasn't that interested, so I turned it off.
You're like, Roddy McDowell's definitely playing outside his age range. It's a horny teen here.
But I'll tell you what, I really liked Fright Night.
Yeah.
I like both movies, but I honestly was not sure what to expect out of Fright Night once it actually got underway. But I thought it was a pretty terrific vampire movie.
Totally. I mean, I'd recommend, both of these, and probably throw in The Lost Boys as well, as good examples of mid-80s vampire movies. And Vamp wasn't a hit. Vamp kind of came out and died, but kind of got cult status over the years. Fright Night was a big hit, though.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it was the biggest hit for the studio that year.
And the studio was?
Columbia, I believe. And they didn't, and I think the director, Tom Holland, kind of said there was no pressure on them because nobody expected anything. Mm-hmm. And then it came out and really hit a kind of slam dunk. But yeah, they're both great films. I mean, I guess we could start off talking about Fright Night first.
Sure.
So I'll turn my paper over. But yeah, 1985. So Tom Holland, who directed and wrote it, had previously written Psycho 2, which is something we should definitely watch. An actual excellent sequel, which kind of people, I think, kind of put on a level of Jaws 2, whereas really deserves to be Godfather 2, Aliens type level of sequel. He did a great job writing that script for Psycho 2. And then when he became a director, he did Fright Night and moved on to things like, after that he did Child's Play, the original Child's Play.
Oh, okay.
The Langoliers, like the Stephen King movie. Actually, he's done a couple of Stephen King adaptations. He did Thinner as well, not particularly good ones, unfortunately. But Fright Night's probably his high watermark as a director and writer. And he said his influences were, he was a horror nerd himself, and he used to love watching the old horror hosts on TV. And I say that looking at your Elvira t-shirt.
Yeah. I'm proudly wearing my cavity colors Elvira
Is that coincidence, or was that just...
Oh, no. I bought this specifically to wear for all of our Halloween episodes.
There you go. Well, it's funny, because actually, that kind of like, that skulled creature does look like the bat at the end of Fright Night, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in England, we didn't really have horror hosts. We had... I remember when I was young, the continuity guy... We had this thing called the Friday Frightener, and about 11 o'clock on a Friday night, the continuity guy, who actually sat at a desk back then, that's how old-fashioned this was, and basically said, "And now the news," with some lovely weather afterwards. I would say things like that. They kind of put a green gauze over him, and some thunder in the background, and he was like, "And now, at Friday, it's the Friday Frightener, we're going to show Dare the Triffids." And that's about as much as we did with a horror host. A few years later, I remember a guy in a rubber mask called Dr. Demonic or something. And again, a very camp English man, basically going like, "Oh, the bad sneers look frightful. I think one of them might be a relative of mine." But you could kind of tell that they were probably aping what America had been doing for a while. Maybe that's somebody who'd seen American TV or come over to America and gone back and said, maybe we should try copying this. Never really took off. But you guys had loads, didn't you? Didn't you have regional ones as well?
Well, I think they were very regional. I think that if you watch movies, it gives you a false sense of how popular these things were. Elvira never actually showed locally in Austin that I ever saw.
I didn't realize that.
I knew Elvira from beer commercials and things like that after she broke. She was locally on an LA station and then got syndicated out.
So how far before her film was that? How long before her film came out?
Only about 4 years or so.
Okay,
yeah.
So early 80s kind of.
Early 80s, and then the movie was about 86, 87, something like that.
Yeah.
But she took off like a rocket. I mean, she basically got on Carson.
I wonder why.
Yeah. And so, yeah, she got on Carson and whatnot. But yeah, so the idea of the horror host was actually something that I think was really heavy in LA, because that's where Elvira was kind of a riff on Vampira, who'd been around in the 50s and 60s. If you've seen Ed Wood, the character to which I refer.
Yeah.
And there's a great documentary about her. The other coasts had other folks, but Texas was pretty Bible belty.
Yeah.
And so even showing monster movies, as the late night thing. So it wasn't really, basic cable. We had some kind of stuff. But, I've mostly seen Elvira on like DVD and tape afterwards. You can rent Elvira tapes at the video store. So, this definitely centers around the whole concept of both Peter Cushing from the Hammer films and then like imagining what if Peter Cushing...
Tom Holland actually, the whole reason Roddy McDowall's character is called Peter Vincent is he took Peter Cushing, Vincent Price,
right,
and stuck the name together. And he was like, I want this guy to be basically, Peter Cushing introducing his old movies. And I think Roddy McDowall said, well, actually, I kind of want to play him more as like somebody really down on his luck. Like, he's kind of burnt out. He thinks his career's over. And I think it is, it's one of those movie coincidences, but I guess you kind of need it to push the plot forward because he needs the money. But he's sacked as Charlie meets him. He's just been thrown off his show because the kids are more interested in guys in hockey masks slashing teenagers than, like he says, classic vampire stories and
So the movie is basically this kid Charlie. I guess it's a fairly small city that he lives in.
Yeah.
He lives in the burbs in a gigantic house.
Massive house.
As all houses in the 80s and movies were gigantic.
Type house.
And with his single mother, and next door, he's making out with his girlfriend, played by Amanda Beardsley, who you may know.
And he's a horror
Marcy.
fan.
Right.
He's a horror fan.
He's making out with his girlfriend.
When he stops making out with her to watch Peter Vincent.
Right. And see, well, right, but there's
new neighbor.
New neighbors moving in. He looks out the back window, much like the Joe Dante movie, The Burbs. He sees something happening in the backyard.
Rear window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, he basically then he sees a hooker going into the house. She gets murdered, and he's like starts putting the pieces together. There's murder next door, and then he starts seeing. He watches all these Peter Vincent movies. He knows of the vampires. And of course, everyone, as he's trying to tell them there's a vampire next door, including the police.
Well, Tom Holland also said he kind of based it on The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and he wanted to do a modern interpretation of that, where he's not so much lying, but because he's a big horror fan and he's got a vivid imagination, just nobody's taking him seriously. And what I love about Fright, the film, is I love the scene where Roddy McDowall's kind of humouring him, and then he drops his mirror as they're leaving Chris Sarandon's house, and then of course he picks it up, and Roddy McDowall realises there is no reflection, and he's like, shit, we've got to get out of here. Yeah, and then I guess he's in denial. Yeah, so that's really well done.
Yeah, Roddy McDowall, I just think he's, when we think of him as kind of like this genre guy, he was always kind of just around.
Cornelius.
He was Cornelius in Planet of the Apes, and then Caesar in Conquest.
It's funky dungarees on.
But I sometimes I wish he got a little more credit than I think he gets. I mean, I think people love him, but I don't think that he's someone that, like, film historians, maybe they do embrace him, and I just don't pick up on it. But I think he did so much genre stuff, and
well, he was also an old-timey survivor. I mean, this is. I mean, actually, on the
childhood friends with Liz Taylor.
Yeah, and on the documentary for this, which I watched a while ago, a couple of months ago now, they actually had a lovely Comic-Con panel from a couple of years ago, I guess one of the anniversaries for this, and they were all talking about Roddy McDowall, and it had all the remaining cast there, and they were all saying he'd invite them around to his house every Friday night, and they were just amazed because it was packed to the rafters with Hollywood memorabilia, and he'd be like, this is a whip from Spartacus, and da-da-da, and he'd be telling them stories and showing them stuff, and they'd be like, oh my god, this is amazing. And I think he actually put it on himself as well to keep a lot of that stuff alive, because he knew it would just get thrown out or trashed otherwise. I think the studios are, I can report from a conference I went to last year, much better about this than you would expect they are about hanging on to a lot of stuff, especially now. But yeah, I think that there's a lot that can just get forgotten, even as actors show up for like new generations who aren't necessarily familiar. They just know they have stars in their eyes and dreams in their heart and want to be actors, but haven't necessarily got the full history of Hollywood. So I can only imagine what that was like. But he's terrific. He totally understands clearly who this Peter Cushing-like character is. And I heard he got a nod from Vincent Price, who came up to him after the film came out and said, that was really well done, you were playing me, weren't you? So that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Because he's got his kind of Sherlock Holmes cape on and
I loved that.
And his bag full of tricks with his big crucifix and stuff.
He's like totally getting into the part. He's gonna do it. But without doing the thing that they would do in so many other movies, where he actually would be like delusional and be like, I am the man. He's like, no, I'm doing this for the kids, sort of thing.
Well, he kind of says, I'm a fake. He says, look, I'm just acting. I'm an actor. I don't believe in this stuff. This stuff isn't real. Mm-hmm. And he has to kind of like, I mean, I hate the phrase man up, but I guess like when they go into the house at the end, he has to basically go, I've got to do this. Yeah.
After all these years of and knowing you don't think you're a fake or a fraud when you're playing a vampire hunter.
No, you're the big hero. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's not like there's an equivalent in real life that you're like, oh yeah, I know, I actually am this way. I play it on screen. Like you might see in other movies where actors suddenly have to be whatever they think they are.
This is something William Shatner said actually in a lot of his wonderful songs. He's actually kind of said, I'm not, I don't save the galaxy, I'm a normal guy, I have normal problems. I can't get my dishwasher to work. And it's kind of, I think it's really, I mean, I think everybody in this, we can talk about the cast a little bit. There's Chris Sarandon plays, I think very well, plays Jerry Dandridge, the vampire.
He was great.
And this is before Princess Bride, where he's great as well. Princess Bride is the kind of total coward prince, but it's like, but yeah, in this he's kind of like, he's so suave. He does update it without it being ridiculous, I think, but it's still, you can kind of tell. even his coat, he's got this big long leather trench coat, and you like that's very 80s, but that kind of fits.
Oh yeah. No, they did a really good job of kind of with his costuming, as far as he's got the blood red scarf he wears with the kind of like, okay, this is the 1980s equivalent of the 1880s kind of overcoat, top coat sort of idea.
Yeah.
With the big collar and lapels.
And he had a lovely detail I heard, which was he was kind of poo-pooey a bit when they first offered this to him, because he'd done a lot of stage work. And he was like, I really want to be in a silly little horror movie, And then Tom Holland kind of, read the script to him and acted it out, got him on board. And, Chris Sarandon said, it was nice because it was very collaborative and they allowed me to add little things. So the reason he's eating fruit all the way through the film is, he said, well, originally I like to think that my genesis was kind of from a fruit bat. So that's why I'm always kind of biting apples.
Oh, crazy.
And stuff. So I just kind of had that. And I think it's just little bits like that kind of make it better.
Yeah.
Just make it more interesting.
He's terrifically malevolent in this movie. And it's something I liked I am not a huge fan of the vampires as anti-heroes thing, or sparkly heroes thing.
I tried that with Dracula Untold, which
I didn't bother with, but I love the fact that he totally does the great. He seems so average and normal when he's like meeting Charlie's mom.
Oh yeah, you can turn on the charm.
Yeah. And you can totally buy into that charm a little bit yourself as an audience member of like, he's very likable. Who wouldn't want him in your living room?
Well, Charlie's girlfriend, you can see why she's kind of gets hooked by him. Not just because he's a vampire and he can kind of do that, but just in general, he's the older man who's kind of, he's a man, he's not a boy.
Right.
Yeah. And I love also, something that I maybe didn't get the first time I watched this, but as I get older, it kind of becomes more prominent. His kind of manservant, or his Renfield, whatever you want to call it, the guy who kind of lives with him.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a homoerotic kind of thing going on as well, though, I think.
Yeah.
Where he's at least, promised him, I'll turn you at some point. But but he's very protective. They're very protective of each other. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I can guess why they probably didn't even add in the idea of like the mom raising her eyebrows at two men living together, because it would have distracted from what is actually the sexuality of the movie that kind of bubbles up between he and Amanda Beardsley's Amy, that character. But yeah, I think that's definitely a bit subtextual if you're watching it, and that guy's pretty good. I can't remember the actor's name. He's one of these guys who was in stuff around that period, and then you never saw him again after that.
Yeah, he's very funny on this Comic-Con panel. He's always kind of cracking wise on that and just saying, as an actor, you don't expect yourself to, find yourself staked to a staircase at 3 o'clock in the morning. So that's definitely worth watching if you get a chance. And what else we got? Brad Fiedel did the music. Lovely synthesizer score, and of course, like we always laughed about with Inner Space, you got to have a club scene.
Oh yeah.
Got to have an 80s club scene. Same as the Terminator, same as most of them. Yeah,
this one I think actually works pretty well.
It's seduction, isn't it?
It's a terrific way to do the seduction.
And the dancing with the mirror is excellent, where she sees herself dancing by herself.
Yeah, it gives her both the opportunity to be seduced in the movie, and then also the horror of what's actually occurring that she can't quite push out.
I do think as a 45, I am 45 sadly, year-old man now. I'm like, basically, he's kind of with a high school girl there. Well,
that's one of the things I wanted to talk about as we talked about these movies, is this is in the 80s when sexuality in high schoolers was not verboten in films.
Yeah.
Or people having sex with high schoolers was not necessarily like off the table.
No, it's more of a joke, really, wasn't it? Like the older guy hanging around or whatever.
Yeah. And the idea that it could happen is not... It didn't give people the total squickies back then, and there was a lot more of a gray area kind of during this period, that if you look back to kind of like even pop culture songs from like the 50s and 60s, people talking about Sweet 16 and all of this stuff. We're talking about high school girls, So yeah, there's
also-
an acknowledgement of the teen's sexuality in this interesting scene at the beginning, which is played for laughs.
Yeah.
But it's she's not ready. With her
yeah.
boyfriend of a year, and she's not willing to go there, and so you kind of understand who and what she is, so that later
She's a
on,
virgin.
right? You do have that scene later where she is ready. Like,
yeah.
So clearly, yes, in that club scene, things have gone poor for Charlie at that point.
Well, in fact, those later scenes where I guess she becomes very much like Dracula's kind of concubine of, you know, he has 3 vampires in the Dracula movies, the 3 women who kind of, you know, hang around him. You know, she's almost unrecognisable, and they have stuck a wig on her, but I mean, just that actress is acting really different, and you know, hats off to her, hands off to her as well, feet off to her. It's like Labyrinth. Hey lady, take your head off. But yeah, because she is, you know, I guess like squirting around, writhing around on the ground, and she's all sweaty, and she's like, you know, kind of in torment, but also kind of in ecstasy, and it's almost like a different character.
Yeah, that actress for over a decade, I think, played the annoying next door neighbor on a very popular American sitcom called Married with Children. I'm not sure if you're familiar.
Well, I think in Fright Night she's 25, playing 16.
Yeah. Well, so a few years later, then she was playing this neighbor. It was not much longer afterward, because I think Married with Children came on in 88, 89, somewhere around then.
Yeah.
And it was really hard for me for the first 15 minutes watching that movie, not going,
She's gonna be annoying.
She's acting much like that character. I don't know too much about Amanda Beardsley's range, but it was kind of like, whoa, you know, and trying to figure out how old she was, and all those things you start Googling, you know, the minute you see someone familiar pop up, you haven't seen in much other stuff.
Well, funnily, both, I mean, we'll stay with Fright Night, but jumping ahead a little bit, just mentioning Vamp, girls in both the films are kind of, I think, borderline, the love interests are borderline annoying, but kind of cute at the same time, and maybe that's how they thought Girls Next Door should act.
Yeah, that was definitely just a thing in the 80s, and I think it probably started in the 70s.
Non-stop talking, basically, you know.
Yeah, she would be kind of like cute and ditzy, was like seen as this really attractive thing at the time.
Yeah, totally.
Which I don't entirely get.
A bit sexist. Quite a lot of sexist.
Super sexist, yeah. It's not very appealing. I mean, even if you think about like Real Genius, like they have the Jordan down the hallway, who's, you know, attractive and whatever and super smart, but they have to make her like, you know, not all with it, so you know you can still get some of that ditz in, even though she's, you know, splicing atoms and whatnot. Yeah,
she just doesn't. Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, I mean, the whole cast. So the rest of the cast, we got Jeffrey Lewis, not Jeffrey Lewis as well. Jeffrey something. What's his? I don't know what his second name is, but he plays the evil Ed in this.
He's still around.
He's still around, but so the playground talk that I always had after watching this film was, do you know the guy who played evil Ed went on to do porn after this? And of course, most people go the other way if they're very lucky. They might start off in porn, end up in legit films. A couple of years after doing Fright Night, he was in gay porn.
Oh.
And I remember images of that being in our tabloid newspapers.
Oh, wow.
And this being like a big playground topic whenever Fright Night was on. You knew the next day everybody would be going, you know the bloke who played Evil Ed? Well. And so, yeah. But actually, he was at the Comic-Con, and he was in fine form, so he either stopped doing that after a couple of years. I think he went back to legit acting again. Not quite sure why he wanted to do that, but
he was in a couple of things that I saw around that period. I remember him in not the Chocolate War, Heaven Help Us, which was a movie about a bunch of kids in Catholic school and their abusive priests.
Chocolate War wasn't a porn film, was it?
No. But yeah, he was in a few things. That, by the way, was not a thing. I'd never heard that until this moment.
Yeah, very strange story. Just very weird, because why would he do that unless it was a personality thing he wanted to explore?
Or he just couldn't make ends meet living in LA. I mean, I don't know how much people would have wanted. So was he in Fright Night 2 then?
He isn't, and he kind of said, you know, it was a bit of a shame he thought the character wasn't brought back, because he was probably the only villain that could have been brought back. Although he's kind of killed pretty.
No. At the end of the movie,
definitively,
he looks out Charlie looks out the window and he says, "You're so cool, Brewster."
But then he only hears that. So is that a bit like? It's a bit like a live and let die ending, isn't it? Really, it's like
my belief was they were setting it up for Evil Ed to come back for the sequel.
Yeah, or it could just be breaking the fourth wall at the end because the film's over. But it's like, well, talking about his performance in that, when it starts off, it could very easily, and is possibly annoying. He's the annoying friend who's like, ah, ha, 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 whatever. But he has a lovely scene where Chris Sarandon takes him in the alley. And Chris Sarandon is great in it as well, where he kind of says, you'll never get bullied again. You'll never be lonely again. They won't laugh at you again. And you kind of see how he's manipulating him. And you also see how, he kind of craves that power a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it's just a very nice little scene, very well acted. Yeah, so definitely some layers to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when he dies, when Woody McDowell kind of stakes him, or he accidentally stakes himself, it's, again, you kind of see him scared and kind of going back to the boy from the wolf, and that's really well done as well, I think.
Yeah, I think having that scene where Roddy doesn't quite know what to do, Vincent, I almost said Vincent Price.
Peter Vincent
is watching, somebody die in front of him, and the way he's killed all of these characters over the years, and kind of seeing what
it's
actually
horrible.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
And kind of just seeing, oh wow, being the undead is not a cup of tea.
Then just peacefully close their eyes and.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm always surprised a little bit that they don't also add in, I know it's convenient for the movie, but in the original Book of Dracula, to kill a vampire, it was not just staking through the heart.
Fire?
No. Well, yeah, maybe. But the way Van Helsing says the only way to kill a vampire, you use the stake to actually pin them to the inside of the coffin.
Okay. Chop the head off.
And then you chop their head off. And the only time you ever see that is in the Coppola Dracula.
That's true. That's very true.
Nobody else ever does that. I guess because it's more convenient to and we don't have to actually behead people and all of that.
Well, it's like a couple of stages more than you kind of need, I guess, for most films. Plus, you'd have to be carrying something to do it with, I guess.
Yeah. This movie also plays with a thing that pops up a lot in vampire stories. It doesn't go super deep on it. I don't know if they were saving it for the sequel or what, but it suggests that Amy and Jerry had some kind of past in a past life.
Well, it's the old chestnut, isn't it? Which I think is one of the weak points. But then they always do this in vampire films, where she just happens to look very similar to his lost love.
Yeah. Which is stolen from The Mummy, the original Mummy movie.
Was it in Dracula as well? No.
They put it into the Coppola Dracula, but it's not in the book.
Okay.
That I can remember. I did read the book, and I kept waiting for that to pop up. Dracula is very different from the movie and play adaptations. The play adaptations are where, from what I have read, Lugosi, when he was doing the stage production in like the 20s, was the one who was like, Dracula's now sexy.
Yeah.
And he brought that then to the movies.
Yeah.
And
I want to be sexy.
Yeah, that's how he thought of himself. And so he was very confused as he aged and became like a smack addict that people weren't finding him sexy anymore.
Yeah.
But it's weird to me that has become such a chestnut of...
Yeah, because it's been used so many times, I think, since. That's why.
So I was shocked to see it when I was watching The Mummy the first time in college.
Well, yeah. Because, I mean, and this is the 30s Mummy?
Yeah. Karloff and Zita Johansson.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Because I know, I saw this thing on YouTube. I know you shouldn't watch too much YouTube. It's bad for your health. But I saw this thing where one guy sat down, bless him, and actually watched, I think, about 8 or 10 different versions of Dracula over the years. The Hammer one, the Universal one, the Spanish one, the Frank Langella one from the end of the 70s, the Coppola one, and he gave them points on how close they did what was in the book. And actually, I think the Coppola one won, but was still missing 50% of the stuff in the book.
Yeah.
But it had the most stuff that does turn up in the book that the others didn't do at all.
The book is really much more about the horror of disease at the time.
Yeah.
Because
sexual disease.
As people just are sick and nobody really knows what's going on with them, and people are doing the wrong things to try to help them. It's like all these diary entries by Mina talking about what's happening to her, or they're writing about each other, talking about, the horror of the disease of what's happening to these people as they're kind of just dying on them, very slowly in front of them.
Yeah.
And then
cholera,
they figure out, it's
been cholera at the time, I guess.
And then they're like, it's that, gross Dracula thing. Because Dracula doesn't...
It's that fawn fella.
He doesn't stop by and, be neighborly and, hang out with anybody.
Yeah.
He's very much just, on the periphery all the time in the novel.
It's that Johnny Foreigner.
Yeah.
It's the start of Brexit.
Exactly.
It's all his fault.
Keep Transylvanians in Transylvania. It's
he just crashed into the coast. He didn't go through passport control.
But yeah, there's definitely stuff like Lucy's coming back and stuff that happens in that. But yeah,
they also switched Lucy. I know we're not talking about Fright Night anymore, but in Dracula they switch in the films at least. They switch Mina and Lucy around.
In the first one, they do
almost like they're on a Ferris, to the point
where I can't remember who's who. A lot of
yeah, and it's because one of them gets killed and then the other one he's after.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, sometimes he's in it, sometimes he isn't.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, his escape in the book is actually pretty dramatic. It's the action in it, we're not talking about the novel of Dracula. We may be slightly off topic, but
right.
Yeah, him escaping and getting away from the brides and all of that is all kind of, and then the action just stops.
Yeah.
And then there's a third of the book where they're just talking about how sick Lucy is.
Yeah.
And then Mina's now getting sick. And yeah. So they don't really do that here, right? It's much more of you get bit, 10 minutes later you're a vampire, and you know all the vampire things somehow. And you can turn into a wolf, apparently.
Depending on the film.
Evil Ed, I will point out, the wolf was 3 different dogs. And a puppet, at least one puppet, maybe 2.
Well, also that's the only time I think I've seen a vampire's minion be able to turn into an animal.
Yeah, but did he?
Who Evil Ed?
Oh, but Evil Ed was a full vampire.
Well, but he's still.
Oh, I see what you're saying. He's not the head vampire.
He's not the count,
right?
I guess. Yeah.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
I don't remember that either.
I've never seen that before. But yeah, it's a great movie. It's very well done. A lot of humour, a lot of good humour in there. I like how the cross doesn't work if you don't believe in it, which has been done before as well.
Yeah.
But how William Woodell does believe in it at the end, it starts working. And yeah, just very nicely done. I was thinking though, watching these 2 films now, kind of the same ending, actually.
Well, vampire movies kind of have about 3 different endings.
But stuck in a cellar, let's get the sunlight pouring in somehow.
Yeah. I did like kind of comparing and contrasting these 2 movies as we kind of segue over to Vamp. This movie is very much locked in the tradition, that was at least Hammer emulating Universal, who was emulating.
They were taking the hats off to the Hammers,
right? And it goes. Now you're taking it all the way back to Stoker, right?
Yeah.
Everything you're doing is kind of in line with that tradition of kind of what people did see in those movies. Kind of people thinking of it with the frock coats, and that's we get Peter Vincent showing up in that. We see faked movies that Roddy McDowall went and shot a scene or 2,
and the clips from his films are hilariously bad.
Yeah,
which I think we're supposed to realise that, but everybody in the film is supposed to think they're kind of like Hammer films,
right?
So almost like everybody in the film thinks they're a level better than we are watching, but Roddy McDowall's actually acting very badly in the films, and he's got this wig on, and it's always supposed to be younger at least, but he's like, creature of the night, you shall not go further past me. And it's like, stake them badly and stuff.
He's actually holding the stake backward.
It's brilliant.
But then you go to Vamp, and they kind of throw all of that out. There's a lot of 30 Days of Night in, I think, Vamp, of kind of how can we create a scenario where vampires kind of create a feeding ground. You had mentioned Innocent Blood, which we have not watched yet. We're going to cover that later.
From Dusk Till Dawn.
Dusk Till Dawn, very similar to From Dusk Till Dawn.
I think Vamp was a big influence on Rodriguez. Don't sue me if it wasn't. But yeah, I mean, Vamp. So I saw Vamp. Fright Night, I think I didn't see until I was kind of in my 20s. For some reason, it just passed me by. Vamp I saw in my teens. And it was on this kind of... We had this thing called Movie Drome every Saturday night on BBC Two, which kind of, before I started going out, to the pub, I used to kind of stay in and watch it.
So you were 11 at this point?
I was about 6. And... sitting there with my pipe and slippers, and even even after we started going out, I'd tape it and watch it, when I got home or the next day. But it was weird films, kind of presented by Alex Cox, who directed Repo Man, and he'd kind of say, these aren't necessarily good films, but these are very entertaining, interesting films for different reasons. And I remember seeing Trancers for the first time. I remember seeing, I think, Lair of the White Worm. I remember seeing Vamp. Just very strange films. And he'd introduce them, and then, they'd kind of show the film. And I remember watching this, and I think I said to you, this was possibly one of my early sexual experiences watching this. I got funny feelings in my tummy from Grace Jones, which, and her dance number, which, because Grace Jones is a weird mixture of very feminine but bloody terrifying.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that's affected my dating life, but we were talking about, this is, both these films are sexualized, but obviously Vamp is set in a strip club, so it's gonna be a lot of flesh on display, and it is an R-rated movie, so it's not. I mean, I don't know if you'd make a PG Vamp, but it's not messing around. It kind of doesn't overdo it, but it shows enough.
No, I mean, I can absolutely see how that could be true. Grace Jones is about at her sexiest in this movie.
Yeah.
She's also wearing only spirals.
She's wearing a couple of coat hangers, basically.
Yeah.
Wire coat hangers.
They do make some interesting choices with her, both aesthetically. Her hair is...
Well, she's Egyptian. We get lots of hints that she's Egyptian heritage, don't we? Because she's got a sarcophagus there, which I can only just about say. Sarcophagus. There you go. Managed it better.
And yeah, she seems to be some sort of royalty.
I like how she takes her headscarf off and her hair's in the same shape. That was unintentionally amusing, I think. And then it's a wig, I guess, because at the end unless she just shaved her head at the end.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what they were doing all with that there, but she
Grace Jones has been nuts.
Yeah, and then she's wearing lots of jewelry, and I would like to read up on who created that jewelry and kind of who worked with her on all of that.
Well, we were saying the Keith Haring chair that she's kind of like gyrating on, up and down on. So you can kind of see she probably choreographed all that herself. I'm sure they kind of gave her free rein to just do something. You have one song that you're going to do, Grace Jones. Please, Grace Jones out. Yeah, it's a good song. But yeah, I mean, like we said, it kind of fits into like the kind of like From Dusk Till Dawn, which I think took a lot of influences from this, of the kind of not really frat guys, but I guess the college guys trying to get into a fraternity who have to hire a stripper, and like you said, they could have just phoned up and gone quite easily. Yeah, their challenge is at the beginning of the movie, if you've not seen it or it's been a while, they don't want to necessarily be frat guys, but they want to live in the frat house because they get food. Yeah. Which, understandable. It's a better lifestyle. And so they're like, we don't want to go through the whole initiation. What can we do? We know you have a big party. And they're like, well, we have to get a stripper. And I turned to Simon and said, in this era, you could have looked in the yellow pages. Yeah. Like, this is not a hard get. Every time I come around your house, there's strippers all over. My house is nothing but a jungle of brass and aluminum poles. So yeah, slash my way through the strippers with my machete to get to the kitchen. But well, no, it's like So they set off, and I guess the first really weird thing that happens is they're driving through the city, and they kind of put into a skid. And the car spins round and round and round. And the first time you see this, I don't know how you felt, but the first time I saw this when I was a teenager, I was a bit like, this is getting really weird. What's going on? I'm not sure if I like this. But then watching it now, it's a very quick way of getting them, when you haven't got much of a budget, to the location you need to get on with the story without wasting any time.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to figure out if it was the inevitable dash of pretension. 2/3 of the way through the movie, I was like, the reason they spun for a full minute on screen is there's a suggestion they're spiraling and they're going into this other world that they've never been in before. They're leaving what they know and maybe entering into, I don't literally mean another dimension.
Oh no.
But as far as the story goes, it's a bunch of dudes who are used to kind of one of the main characters is very much a Steve Guttenberg type.
Yeah.
And taking that character of who would be a Mahoney and dropping him into Dusk Till Dawn is essentially what's happening there.
Well, AJ, played by Robert Russler, he's kind of the cocky best friend, and he plays exactly the same role, I think, the year before in Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
Yep, that's where I knew him from. Okay.
And in that as well, he's the kind of dependable friend who gets killed off, so, you haven't got anybody to support you now, you got to do it yourself. Mm-hmm. Leaving the kind of the shy guy to have to kind of like, I guess, come forward and save the day. Mm-hmm. But we've also got, along for the ride,
Geddy Watanabe. I was so excited when his name came up in the credits. It's the first time in the 80s you will see him just speaking with his regular American accent and not playing an ethnic stereotype.
And he is very funny in it. I mean, he makes me laugh now. I've seen this a few times, but I mean, he is what would happen if you took a nerd to a strip club, basically.
Yeah.
He gets drunk. He keeps saying he loves everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, he plays in this the filthy rich kid who has no friends. We all kind of knew this kid at some point who was just like, you're trying too hard. Stop trying so hard. You're trying to buy my friendship, sort of thing. But he's thoroughly enjoyable in the movie. He was great.
And it's like I watched a documentary about this last night, and he had a funny story where he kind of said he based to the role because he wanted to play a vampire, and they said, well, you do change, at some point. And he said he kind of freaked himself out though, because once they put the makeup on him, he said he looked like his granddad, and he really, really didn't like it. And he was basically just like, get the makeup off as soon as we're finished. I don't like this at all. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, also we've got Dee Pfeiffer, is the girl from high school who the lead character can't remember. And what I like about her character, she's the kind of ditzy one we were talking about earlier. But what I like about her is right until the end, they keep running with the fact that she could be a vampire and vamp out at any moment. And, even though, she's like, I can't, she keeps like helping him and saying, I can't believe you would think that. They'll go past a mirror and you'll see him, but then she was ahead of him anyway. So it's kind of like, was she in the mirror? Or are you just seeing him go past? And it's like, there's little teasers all the way through.
I was glad the movie played with that.
Yeah.
Because I was in my head going, there's no world in which this doesn't end with her vamping out as the final kill.
Yeah.
So I was actually pleasantly surprised, spoilers, that she was actually just who she was.
And they just kiss and walk off into the sunset. Sunrise, rather.
Yeah.
And that last scene where they do walk off, I only found this out again last night. I'm just parroting this documentary, but it is kind of good stuff in it. They had to close that street, and literally when you see the traffic come, that's the real traffic they're letting through after they filmed that shot. But on the wall, the director said, I didn't see this at the time, but there's an advertisement to give blood plasma.
Yes.
Yeah, and
I thought that was intentional. I thought that's why they picked
He said,
that corner.
we saw that afterwards and we were like, that's great. Because like we were saying, once they get to the club, inside the strip club...
Yeah, by the way, I wasn't expecting this to be that movie. No. When I thought this was going to be about a guy who went to a club once and started a relationship with a stripper. I didn't know. I didn't know at all what this movie was about. All I'd ever seen was the YouTube clip of Grace Jones's dance. And so...
I guess I've never told you because I just presumed Like, I can remember it.
Yeah.
So I just presume you kind of know what it's going to be like. But
No, I had no idea. I thought it was going to be about a college kid who went to like a strip club, and then he kind of has the horror of like becoming a vampire, or like I thought it was going to be just this story about AJ and Katrina.
Yeah.
I was very pleasantly surprised to find out not only was that not true, but Grace Jones was going to be used in this very particular way that really used all of her. I'm trying not to be like just gross and sexualize her, but like her best assets. Like, she can be really weird, right?
She can be very weird, and she can be very animalistic. You know,
and so they really play to those strengths in this film. Yeah.
I mean, is it time? Can I put out my Grace Jones anecdotes?
Please. There's no time like the present.
Here we go. Number one. So Grace Jones had to record ADR afterwards to put on her grunts and groans on various scenes, you know, where she's like killing people and whatever. And they said she turned up to the studio in an all-metal dress, and she kept getting animated and clinking. And they were like, you know, go again, Grace, we can't use that one. And then she went again, got animated, clinked. And they went, go again, Grace. And she got frustrated and went, fuck it. Took all her clothes off and did it naked.
That sounds like Grace Jones.
So that's Grace Jones. The other one is when she was killing AJ. Those fangs were sharp, a little bit like American Werewolf with the werewolf head attacking Jack at the start. They were sharp fangs. They were hard, and Robert Russler said, you know, she really hurt him, and he was like basically screaming for real. And then, you know, she was like, are you okay? And he went, no, I'm not okay. And she went, well, that's because you're a pussy. Yeah. And he said, what made that worse is we'd have to wait 9 hours for her to turn up to shoot the scene. So, yeah. There's also fantastic footage in this documentary. Definitely, I'll lend it to you, where they're practicing the scene where she does kill him, where she's kind of astride him, you know, it's very sexual, on the director on a couch. And I guess they filmed it, but it's kind of funny because, you know, she's kind of like really getting into it. The director's looking a bit scared. So yeah. So, you know, a lot of kind of great kind of Grace Jones stuff there. Yeah. She's a one and only.
Yeah, I will forewarn you, if you're going to watch this one and you typically watch horror movies around the kids or whatever, this is one that, as we have mentioned about 30 times, does take place in a strip club.
There's some nudity, there's some
there's
definitely...
And there's also just like bare asses and things like that wander by. I mean, I don't think anything much of nudity, but if you do, just be aware. But it is... I definitely... So have you ever seen the movie Tapeheads?
No.
Okay.
Steve Buscemi, is it?
No. We'll watch it at some point. Yeah. But they go and talk to a guy who's a producer who's wanting to make music videos, and he tells him he wants production value. And they basically figure out that means tits. Boobs and butts.
Tits
yeah.
And ass.
Yeah, he says tits and ass. And so that's all I kept thinking of, was like the producers were like, yeah, okay, so if we can convince a bunch of actors to stand around naked for about 5 weeks on set, yeah, we can definitely keep renting this, at least, you know, some rental copies.
But Richard Wenk said with this, although they hardly had any money, they did have 2 weeks rehearsal time, and he said that really is kind of unheard of these days. You don't have any rehearsal time anymore. And actually, it's kind of funny because I feel like all the successful horror films, like The Thing, that hold up from the 80s, kind of had good rehearsal time and good prep time. So all those young actors, especially the three guys and Didi Pfeiffer, had time to get to know each other. And the two main guys, you know, AJ and Keith, said they had time to try to build up a backstory and a friendship and start talking over each other's lines as though they'd known each other for years. And also, Richard Wenk, the director, kind of said he'd never done this before but he storyboarded everything because he said we have so little time to do this. Everybody has to know exactly what I need, and they just went through it, boom, 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 boom. And he said it kind of ran like clockwork, you know, which I think Spielberg did as well with Raiders, because they were on a time limit with that.
Yeah,
did the same thing. You know, there's no time for improv, you know.
Yeah, probably after Jaws, they were watching Spielberg like a hawk, but
Yeah, in 1941.
right. Oh, right.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's looks incredibly 80s when you're watching it. There's no getting around that, but in a very good way. I wouldn't say exactly in a Manhunter sort of way, but in a like they do a lot with lighting and with camera angles and just kind of
Colors.
effects, smog, those sorts of things to truly try and make it feel like they're like I said, in kind of a parallel universe through the whole thing. Like they're not in their element at all.
well, I think partly they realise that we want to make this look different, like they have gone into another world. But then also, if we shot this realistically, it would look incredibly cheap.
Yeah.
So all we can do is kind of cover it up a little bit, like almost like a music video, a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Takes a lot of cues from music videos from the era.
And I think you can see that in other films around this time, like Highlander, where they really get the most they can out of their buck by like you said, camera angles and shadow and expressionistic lighting. I mean, even before they get to the club, even in their dorm room, there's some really interesting lighting on their faces from the windows. Because I don't think we ever actually see the windows, but we have the windows on the wall, the shadows of them.
Yeah, they do a lot of kind of like expressionistic and noir-esque sort of lighting.
Yeah. And I love the fact that, I mean, you kind of mentioned how many great old actors there are in this.
Yeah, that was what I wanted to talk about next.
Yeah. I mean, I love the fact that, and I think, again, this is a sign of, why we're still watching these horror movies 30 years later, even if they didn't do very well at the time, is even the minor characters have an interesting backstory. Like, I love the owner of the club who always wanted to go to Vegas. He's obviously a big fan of Frank Sinatra and all those crooner guys.
Yeah, they got left behind.
Yeah. He's still living in the 50s or whatever, Although I did notice a line in there that kind of goes against that a little bit, where it goes like, I haven't had a real drink for 75 years, which must have mean he got turned into a vampire in the early 1900s. Yeah.
I mean, he talks at one point about like people who were playing that club at one point when in better era.
Well, it sounded like he had the club, and then Katrina got him and decided to stay there.
Yeah.
But he's always wanted to go to Vegas, but she won't let him. She's like, no, this is
Vegas really kind of blew up. Like I want to say late 50s, early 60s, and he's talking about like Louis Prima. Those are the guys who went from LA to
Phil Harris,
to over to Vegas and start playing those shows. So yeah, he's still stuck in the like wanting to be at the Sands Motel with the Rat Pack. And there's a guy who I think I've only ever seen in
big guy?
Yeah, he's in not like One Crazy Summer, but one of those Savage Steve Holland movies. Is the guy who owns the burger joint. And there's Billy Drago pops up.
Billy Drago's great from Untouchables.
Yeah.
Playing Snow, an albinic vampire, I guess.
Yeah, his whole gang is made up of albinos.
And a couple of African American girls.
Right, yeah. There's this curious thing that they did in the 80s that someday we need to just collect what was going on with how Hollywood thought of punks. But there was this thing they did where they didn't want to appear racist, but they wanted to have gangs. And so they were like, they're not a Latino gang, they're not an Asian gang, they're not a black gang.
Yeah.
And for some reason we can't imagine a white gang, or they could. And so they were like, if they are, they're punks.
Well, they could have done it like Warriors.
And that's where I think it was coming from.
Yeah.
Like I think they had this idea of like they're costumed up sort of thing. And so they kind of took the punk aesthetic, which was mostly just pissed off suburban kids.
Yeah, it wasn't real punk.
Right.
Yeah.
And applied it to like Billy Drago's like 15 years too old to be in this movie to be what he is. He's still fine.
He also, there's a weird scene where I feel like he's surprised when he comes across the other vampires.
I don't think he's a vampire, though.
But his gang is.
No.
Well, yeah, because the kind of African-American girl...
No, she just has bad teeth.
No, I thought she had 3 fangs.
No, she just has bad teeth.
Oh, she has... I'll go watch it again now.
Okay, no, she just has bad teeth. That's the whole thing, yeah.
See, I thought that was 3 fangs.
Yeah, no, first I thought that was what was going on too, but I think it genuinely was...
That makes more sense, though.
Oh, it makes way more sense. Yeah, because otherwise they never would have won that fight in the diner. But
totally.
So yeah, there's
Thank
this
you for
weird.
clarifying.
Yes.
For 30 years,
yeah.
I haven't understood that policy.
But yeah, it's got a lot of kind of things left over from that era.
Well, the big guy as well, because I thought you were going to mention basically the bouncer guy who looks like he's walked straight out of Goodfellas.
Yeah,
and
that's the guy who was in the Savage Steve Holland movie.
Yeah, so he's basically got all these bite marks on his back because he's, I guess, who Grace Jones has a quick snack on if there's no victims around. But then he's also secretly kind of in love with her.
Oh yeah, totally.
And he's got a little picture of her in her pharaoh kind of get up from Egyptian times. And the other guy goes, get over it, Vlad. It's never going to happen. Or if it did happen, she's over you. And he's like, ugh, and I love just stuff like that. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great little bit. It really enhances the world of the movie. I don't know. A lot of good vampire stuff kind of came out around this era between like Near Dark and
Lost
Boys, and it's kind of interesting that we had at the same time, because this movie came out not that far apart from Fright Night, which is kind of looking back at what's been there, and this one kind of hops forward and says, what can we do with this concept?
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure right now. We seem to be doing this like vampire like fantasy hero thing in the movies. I'll be curious to see what the next wave of vampire horror is.
Well, we're still on I'd say we're either at the tail end of a huge zombie kick, which has been going on for almost 20 years. I think it kicked off with the remake of Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah.
Start of the 2000s. And I think it's pretty much burnt out by now. I mean, or at least somebody needs to come up with something real original spin on it. But yeah, everything else like werewolves and vampires seem to have fallen by the wayside. I'm not quite sure why. Because we've talked before about, is that reflecting the political climate or the social climate? We can talk a little bit though. So Vamp has never been remade, and I think like we said, partly because Rodriguez and Tarantino kind of stole a lot of it from Dusk Till Dawn. Strip club again. Some guys turn up. And totally the situation changes. From one type of film, one genre to another. Fright Night was remade. So we had Fright Night 2, which they made 3 years after this. Roddy McDowall came back, and then the main character came back. He was at college now, so he was at college. They lost the girlfriend, so it's an all new girlfriend, and Eva Wade wasn't in it, but it's him and Roddy McDowall. And the twist on it was actually quite good. It's a solid kind of Jaws 2 level sequel. Doesn't do anything embarrassing. The twist is it's the sister of Chris Sarandon wants revenge.
Oh.
So she comes into town with her gang of vampires, and she's obviously very seductive, very beautiful, very European. And she, I think, bites him but doesn't quite turn him. But he's actually in denial. So he thinks basically he kind of like imagined all the previous Fright Night because he's had therapy ever since. Whereas Roddy McDowall is also the other way, because he's the one that's like, no, something is happening here. This is real. We're in trouble. So they actually switched the roles in the sequel, and it kind of it's good. It's solid, like I say. And then I think 2011 they actually did a remake with Colin Farrell as the vampire. And David Tennant from Doctor Who as Peter Vincent. So in this version, they moved it to Las Vegas. Anton Yelchin from Star Trek was the Charlie Brewster. He was the kid again. The guy from Mac and Superbad. Who's the guy? McLovin was Eva Wade. Colin Farrell was basically the vampire. David Tennant was Peter Vincent, and David Tennant played him as basically Chris Angel. So he was like a big, long-haired, very rock and roll Las Vegas magician. Sounds good in theory, and it should have been, but they didn't really give him enough to work with. But Colin Farrell stands out. He's actually quite sinister as a vampire, kind of a lot nastier than Chris Sarandon was. And then they actually did another sequel called Fright Night 2, which you would have thought would carry on from that. Maybe it would have even been a remake of the original Fright Night 2. But it's kind of straight to DVD crap, where they pretty much made Fright Night again, but just with a woman as the vampire. So it's like, guys, you could have come up with another story, or you could have carried on the Colin Farrell story.
Yeah.
So I think, Hollywood are out of ideas there. Tom Holland himself said he had an idea, which, he says nobody's ever going to give us any money for. But all the remaining cast, obviously Roddy McDowall's dead now, but all the remaining cast are on board for, where now Charlie Brewster, same actor, is a dad, single dad. He's got a son or a daughter. And he realises the abandoned house next door, Evil Ed's kind of living there and trying to resurrect Jerry Dandridge.
Oh.
And I'm like, I'd pay to see that. That sounds great.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised they don't want to do that.
I mean, compared to just making some rubbish rehash with no-name actors.
Yeah, it's not like those actors would cost a lot to get. And it's the
And I'm sure you could homage Roddy McDowall like they do Donald Pleasance in the Halloweens. At least have him doing the voiceover or something. Vampires do exist or something at the start.
Right.
Yeah,
and of course he could have scattered children he didn't know about, and things like that. You can always find some way to make it work. That's unfortunate.
But I guess all the executives in Hollywood are probably in the 20s. They're like, we don't even remember Fright Night. We're not going to give all these old guys some money. What do the kids want?
Right. Well, we tried to redo Fright Night in 2011, and it didn't quite take off. Sorry we didn't ask you how this should be done.
Yeah. In fact, talking about that, interesting point, showing how the disconnect between the money men and the talent. When Fright Night first came out, the 85 version on DVD, it was bare bones. And the fans were like, there's no extras. So the cast recorded 9 commentaries and put them up on YouTube. And just said, we're just doing this for free for fans. So when they reprinted the DVD years later, the actual studio put those commentaries on the DVD. So basically, that's the talent doing the job of the studio for them.
Oh, that's so broken.
Because they know what the fans want. Because the fans have said, we want this.
Yeah. The studios need to do a better job of going to the horror cons and listening and finding out. There's really, as much as I think comic fans are nuts, horror fans are.
Thank you for reminding me. Got another thing for you. So comics, they had a Fright Night comic that came out between I think 88 and I think about 92.
I have no recollection of this comic at all.
I only heard this recently, but it was basically the two of them, Charlie and Peter Vincent, kind of doing an X-Files thing, investigating, sometimes even being brought in by the police. There was people turning into vampires with giant bats, kind of stuck to their heads, kind of like almost controlling them.
Okay.
There was this kind of Aquaman they had to stop, this kind of octopus man.
Okay.
There was this kid...
So we should all be trying to stop Aquaman.
It's a sequel. There was a kid who could turn himself into a spider. It was basically crazy. I mean, no pun intended. It was kind of batshit crazy. Yeah. But that ran for a few years. Yeah. So I'd be interested in finding that and reading that.
Well, this actually is a good segue into something I wanted to bring up about both movies, because that answers the question I was going to ask, which is, realistically, if you think of each of these movies as a singular thing, at the end of it, and I think this is, we asked the same question after Ginger Snaps, but what did these characters, the camera closes out, it says, they're walking hand in hand now down the street at the end of Vamp.
It's the happy ending.
Yeah, he's with Amy, and we just flash forward to somehow 6 months later where no one's asking what happened to Jerry.
Oh, yeah.
In the house next door. Like, the house was trashed.
Oh, yeah.
There was goo and blood everywhere. And
well, it's like the end of Poltergeist. You'd have thought, wouldn't they still be dealing with insurance agents in Poltergeist too?
Yeah. But yeah, there's no, you look at it and you're like, well, when the mom comes home and there's a pool of blood on the floor and the banister is shattered
and the door's being ripped apart.
Yeah, it's what cleanup job did they do between the hour they had? They're exhausted. They've almost been murdered, and now they've got to get out the 409.
Oh yeah.
It's to me, it's one of the fascinating things, and I would hate to think as you're sitting down to write a horror script, you're like, oh, how are they going to get away with it so no one knows and they don't end up in jail, which is what would happen to all of these characters.
Well, no, it's a good point, because I'm trying to write a script in the moment, and I'm finding it's easy to write an interesting death, but then you have to factor in, well, somebody's going to find the body, and the authorities are going to get involved. And if there's a lot of bodies start piling up, the FBI or whatever are going to get involved. And it's like, suddenly everybody's going to be looking for who's the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And you're kind of painting yourself into a corner pretty fast. So, yeah, I mean, you have to, logically say, it's not like people will just ignore it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you have to kind of do the cleanup, like you say. You have to say, well, what's going on with what happened? What's the outcome of that?
Yeah. At least in Nightmare on Elm Street or something, there wasn't a lot of physical stuff that occurred. Maybe some torn sheets or
what about Johnny Depp though?
But did that really happen? I'm trying to remember.
I think that did happen.
There really was blood everywhere.
Yeah. Because actually that kind of played it both ways, because there was the guy who hung himself in prison or got hung in prison. That would kind of work. But then, Johnny Depp got ripped apart. It's like, how would you explain that?
Yeah, and it's one of the things. I mean, it's not something that makes me stop enjoying horror movies. But when you do have the thing of our heroes have won the day and they just walk away at the end.
Yeah.
You have body parts strewn everywhere.
Also, where was the fire brigade when they were down the tunnels sorting out Grace Jones? Surely the fire engines would be turning up all over the place up the top.
There was a vampire sitting at the switcher. Yeah, that is something I liked in Vamp, by the way, was how they had worked out their system.
Yeah.
To the T. Okay, well, we got to get rid of they thought about stuff like, get rid of the keys and the wallets, and we've got to get rid of any evidence of these guys.
And I liked how he did say, because anybody watching the film for titillation, it's a bit of a kind of kick in the head for them, because he kind of says, well, only the saddos come here, and the desperate, lonely people. So, if you're watching this because it's like, whoa, strip club, you're like, oh, it's talking about me.
It's true, though.
Yeah. So it's like nobody will miss them,
Yeah.
Because, like he says, who did you tell you were coming here?
Yeah.
You didn't tell anybody because you didn't want them to know.
So if you're heading down to the landing strip this Saturday, just know you're a saddo. No one will miss you.
Grace Jones might be there.
That seems like as good a note as any, really. Simon, thank you so much for sharing with me. And everybody, I wish you a happy Halloween season. I hope that if it's been a while since you've watched these movies or you've never watched them before, you give them a shot. I'm not exactly sure what we're doing for our next round, but I think we're going to be doing another monster double feature. So
excellent.
We will be back.
See you then.
And woo!
Ooh. That's good.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.